On our first panel today, we are welcoming the Honourable Diane Laboutier back to committee, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard, and of course accompanied by Deputy Minister Annette Gibbons and Director General of Budget Planning and Financial Management, Luc Robitaille. And from the Canadian Coast Guard, we have Mr. Mario Pelletier, Commissioner. Thank you, Minister, for taking the time to appear today. You will have 5 minutes or less for your opening statement. The floor is yours.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First off, colleagues, before I start, I'd like to say that I'm pleased to be here with you today on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people to present before the members of the committee the supplementary budget C 2023-24 on behalf of Fisheries and Oceans and the Coast Guard. In the context of this supplementary estimates budget, I'm calling for most of the budget in 3 areas of the department for a total of $102.3 million. First off, $50 million for the Salish Sea Initiative, which is from last year's budget. This amount is to establish an investment fund directed by Indigenous peoples which will support the long-term participation in priority projects for First Nations who are working to improve the health of ecosystems within their territorial waters. Second, $30 million for the increase in costs of fuels for marine usage associated with the Coast Guard fleet. This will allow the Canadian Coast Guard to continue its activities for this year, specifically by supporting the Conservation and Protection Program and conducting surveillance activities at sea for law enforcement. $11.6 million to protect and promote the health of whale populations that are endangered, like the North Atlantic right whales, the St. Lawrence Estuary beluga, and the British Columbia southern killer whales. If members of the committee have any questions about this, the officials that are here with me and myself would be pleased to answer any of your questions. That being said, before I get there, I'd like to point out that I'm quite well aware of the fact that the members may have other points that they want to address, and I'll start with these. For instance, let's start with sea bass. Redfish. As you know, I announced the reopening of this commercial fishery for redfish in Unit 1 this year. In the context of the notions that we have that there was a moratorium for over 30 years, I can say that that is nothing but great news. The first phase of this reopening of the commercial fishery will last 2 years. During this period, quota will be at least, and I say at least 25,000 tons or more, according to the recommendations issued by the Advisory Committee on Redfish, which was held earlier in the month. I know the ways in which the quota were dispersed between the fleets, as well as fisheries management measures, have also been discussed at the meeting. The department also currently is compiling all comments, and this should support our decision-making prior to the opening of the season. I know that this reopening is fledgling. I am convinced that over time, when the field will have really gotten up to speed, had developed the markets and strengthened its transformational capacity, redfish fishery will be an incredible economic development tool for our coastal communities. That said, I've repeated for many months, and it is a fact, this particular fishery will not solve everything, and I would like to address the issue of the shrimp fishery. And I would like to start by expressing my solidarity for all those who've been affected by the closure this week of the processing plant Les Fruits de Mer de l'Est de Matane. I must say, it is never good news when any enterprise in the fisheries has to close down, and it's as simple as that. As we know, there are challenges that the industry is facing, and there are many. And with climate change, the warming of the oceans, everything is shifting. The data from Fisheries and Oceans that was presented last week is clear. The climate crisis is real. Its effects are already being felt in marine ecosystems. Shrimp are a victim of this, but other species will also have to deal with similar knock-on effects over the next few years. This is why we have to have a broader thought process as to what's happening in this area. We owe it to our children and grandchildren. Last week, I had a constructive meeting in Ottawa with representatives from the Association des Capitaines Propriétaires de la Gaspésie, the Regional Acadian Federation, and the Fish, Food, and Allied Workers. We addressed the difficult situation that the crab fishers in the estuary in the Gulf of St. Lawrence are currently facing, but also the importance of supporting fishers and processors in the region. Rest assured that in the meantime, I continue to maintain the lines of communication open with the industry, along with the indigenous communities and my provincial counterparts, in order to address climate change head-on with our coastal communities. Let's discuss the Elver fishery. As you know, last week, I made the difficult decision to not open the fishery in 2024 in the Maritimes and to not grant any licenses for Elver fishery. Over the last few years, this fishery has been faced with very serious challenges, unauthorized fishery, and repercussions on conservation of the species, as well as threats and violence against fishers, fisheries agents, and others. I'm fully aware that this fishery is very significant. It plays an important role from an economic standpoint for these coastal communities. Responsible management of resources and public safety must take precedence over everything else. Any individual trying to fish in this fishery will have to be subject to a number of law enforcement measures. And since last week, fisheries agents have proceeded to arresting at least 34 individuals and seized equipment. Fisheries agents are doing their work and patrolling the rivers, the facilities, export points, as I am at this very moment. Trying to claim the opposite is not only false, but also it urges other peoples to commit illegal crimes, which will lead to even further arrest. Mr. Chair, allow me to say that I find this deplorable and absolutely irresponsible. The department is continuing its work to bring about the necessary changes to the regulations and to management in order to make sure that the safety and sustainability of this fishery is ensured for all fishers. The fishery will reopen only when these measures have been fully implemented. On this note, thank you to all. I am now prepared to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And before I go to questions, of course, I want to welcome a colleague to Fisheries and Oceans Committee. I don't know if he's been on it before. I don't think he has. But he might learn something today about fish. I don't think there's much fish around he's riding in Toronto. But I'd welcome James Maloney to committee today. And I'd remind him to behave himself here or he'll get in big trouble. So for our first round of questioning, we'll start off with Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I welcome the witnesses here today, especially the Honourable Minister. Last year, through the Chair, the logbook data for northern cod was not analysed. When was the last time that the catch rate data for northern cod, per unit data from the logbooks, was analysed?
We'll have to come back to you. I can't answer.
Okay, so I submitted an order paper question in October. Fishermen's logbook data to give per unit catch rates for northern cod have not been analysed since 2019. Now, I was told that it would be all analysed for the assessment. So how, if you had 4 years and it wasn't analysed in 4 years, it wasn't analysed as of October, how is that data going to be available to be used in this year's stock assessment? in three short months.
On the survey, we've had the science discussion,
No,
so.
this is the logbooks that the fishermen take their time to fill out as accurately as they can. Why is that data not important to DFO? Do you not trust the fishermen? Do you not have enough budget with the 50% increase that you've had since 2015? Or sorry, doubled the budget, 50% more employees, yet logbook data that's 4 years old that could have helped last year to give an increase in the quota because the Ground Fish Council wanted a 17,000 ton quota, the FFAW asked for 25,000 tons, yet you're sitting on that data not tabulated, and the fishermen know, DFO ground level people back home know, they tell me, they know that there's the northern cod is quite plentiful based on the catch rates. Why is that not, has that not been used in setting up the quotas, and that since the cods come out of the critical zone in 2016?
Mr. Chair, we do use various sources of data to provide our stock assessments, and so I will come back on the specific question of the use of this particular data series.
So, last year, the vessel patrol days on the nose and tail of the banks was less than half of what it would be in a normal year. Will you commit to bringing those patrol days back up, especially given the fact that the northern cod quota could go to a level where you're going to give 5% to NAFO to give foreign vessels the opportunity to fish, to direct for northern cod again? Are you going to bring that back, those vessel patrol days back up to the standard 500 days a year?
Look, I just completed a tour of the United States where I had the opportunity to meet with the Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard, and we made sure to actually work in a collaborative way to make sure that we can protect our borders from illegal fisheries. So there's important work that needs to be done, the U.S. and Canada together, to make sure that we protect our borders and also to protect ourselves against illegal fisheries.
Laboutier. I'll turn my time over to Mr. Arnold now.
Thank you, Mr. Spall. Thank you for being here, Minister. Minister, your department was a funding partner of BC's invasive mussel defense program that inspects watercrafts at BC's borders. But you allowed that funding to lapse last year, and that decision has directly weakened the most effective protection of BC's waters against aquatic invasive species, especially zebra and quagga mussels. In 2022, your government supported the BC Mussel Defense Program with $475,000. This was completely cut in 2023, and for 2024, you have announced only $90,000 for the program, a reduction of over 80%. Why has your government abandoned BC's invasive mussel defense program?
Je vous remercie pour votre question.
Thank you for the question. In fact, I can tell you that Madame Baron sent me a letter last March 7th, and our department, we announced last February additional funding in the fight against these two zebra and quagga mussels, so funding of over $500,000, which I think is a step in the right direction, but we need to work to continue to do our work together to fight these invasive species that are truly problematic all around the country. Of course, the zebra mussel is one of these species.
You must be aware of the costs in Ontario lakes. The British Columbia government did a study estimating that it could be up to $120 million for the province just in annual maintenance costs. Why are you continuing to expose BC taxpayers to these permanent costs and damages that could be prevented with a strong preventative defense program?
Listen, there is money that is being allocated for invasive species. I can tell you that the zebra mussel is found all over Canada, in lakes, in our
It's
Jean,
not
puis il y
all
a
over.
du
at the St.
important qui se fait.
There's important work that is being done as to the various species, and I can ask the Deputy Minister to provide further detail.
We
Okay,
use
time has gone a little bit over, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go on to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister and officials, for being here. At our last meeting, the issue of carbon tax came up, and I was hoping that word got to you, Madam Minister, to give us a definitive answer on the impact of the carbon tax on marine fuels. So, what can you tell us about that?
Merci, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hardy, for your question. Mr. Chair, what I can say is this. As to the carbon tax, we have received really wonderful information that was submitted by our colleague, Mr. Morrissey, indicating that the fuel used for fishing operations is not subject to the price on pollution. And I would like to note, as Mr. Morrissey said, that climate change is a major concern for Canadians, the Atlantic region, and the Quebecers, as well as a concern for people in the Pacific regions, for all people, for all oceans. These are concerns that we are all experiencing in the realm of climate change. And as I've said, with respect to the the carbon tax, it's not subject to the price on pollution.
To answer, Madam Minister, hopefully that clears things up for dear leader and a few others. A number of us have been on this committee since 2015 or early 2016. And over that time, I have to tell you that as a group, this committee with its various members have been almost unanimous in focusing on the issue. And, you know, the partisan stuff, of course, it gets up every now and again. But, you know, it's the real focus is on doing what's best for our wild fish stocks and for the people who make a living and whose culture depends on it. We have come up with any number of excellent reports with very solid recommendations. We have a concern that very few of those recommendations are ever acted on. And I'm wondering if, in your short time as minister, you've had the time to go back and assess the performance of the DFO in addressing the concerns that we've raised and our suggestions for how to resolve them.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I'd like to mention, for the benefit of all colleagues around the table, and you're well aware, I'm from the Gaspé. My riding is Gaspésie-les-Îles-de-la-Madeleine. So climate change, I experience these. And everywhere that I've gone to meet with fishers in the Atlantic, in Quebec, on the West Coast, and even in the Arctic, all fishers are concerned today about the effects of climate change. And even in successful fisheries, like in the lobster industry, there is concern that's being raised by these associations and the fishers. And I can assure you that I take into consideration all of the work that is done by this committee. And it matters, you know, along with the recommendations that you make. I would say this. The work that you've done on foreign property, the protection of the owner operator model, that's also very important. I hear about this on the West Coast, the importance of getting back to that kind of a model where it's a sort of a captain operator owner model. So as far as I'm concerned, the committee's work is well thought out, and you provide important recommendations in the work that I will be doing. I will be taking into consideration the committee's recommendations.
I would, your colleagues up there have quite often been present and have heard directly our frustration that actions that we feel are necessary and valid are not happening, or certainly not happening quickly enough. Madam Minister, I wonder, you know, given, if you look at all of the recommendations, all of the things that we have studied and suggested and surfaced in terms of issues and resolutions, are the resources of the DFO sufficient to deal with those effectively and in a timely manner, on top of all of the other things that they're also expected to do, like stock assessments, which in many cases are far, far behind schedule? Do they have enough resources, or are those resources managed effectively?
Pour moi,
To my mind, what I can tell you about the resources of the department, it's important to have resources, if only for small craft harbors. It's a tool that's important for the fisheries industry. We really have to look at the sector as an economic development sector. We have to make sure we have the resources necessary to allow for things like in the Maritimes, if we look at everything regarding aquaculture, for mussels, oysters, that we have high-quality products. When we look at the West Coast as well, we have to be able to work in close cooperation. Given climate change, we will have issues, a food security issue. So we have to have people in the field who will allow us to do our job even better. We were talking about invasive species a minute ago. It'll be important to work in even greater cooperation with scientists in order to make the best possible decisions in the future, together with the people in the fisheries sector when it comes to capture, to make sure that our products have added value. We can no longer allow ourselves to have food waste in this sector. We have to use all our products the best way possible, because we had meetings last week. We provided information to the media. All the wild species right now, all over the world, are in danger. And I can tell you that everyone is in the same food pantry right now. Our fish, foraging species, the ones that we eat, we really, in our government, have to consider the fisheries sector as something that will make our economy richer, that'll create jobs. We have high quality products, and we can do even better in our department.
To Madame Debian for 6 minutes or less, please.
merci d'être là, Madame la
Thank you for being there, Minister. I'm pleased to see you and your colleagues as well. Look, climate change is often a scapegoat. We were talking about owner captains. It's not just shrimp that are in danger of extinctions, captains too. I think we're in a fisheries crisis situation. We in the Bloc are the voice of Quebec fishermen. Plants are closing. We don't have any openings regarding purchase of permits or licenses. The share given to offshore fishermen is very high, and that's what contributed to the decline. Is there an option for you and your colleagues in immigration to restore the situation regarding foreign workers and have provisions that will have us avoid bankruptcy? Because, you know, boats are for sale. They won't sell if there's no fishery. Is this an option that we could look at quickly? Well, first of all, saying that climate change is a scapegoat, I don't agree with your premise. We have to see that there's no ice in the south, in the Gulf. There's no ice on the East Coast. So it's catastrophic. This year is quite peculiar. It's the first year there's no ice. So it's really climate change, as you said. Yes, species are in difficulty. Capelin is in difficulty. Mackerel's in difficulty. Herring's in difficulty. The shrimp, There will be other species in difficulty, and the Gulf is in a very specific situation. We saw this in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Climate change has increased temperatures by 1.7, 1.9 degrees, and that change will mean that the Gulf will continue to warm. So what's important to me is to remain in contact, as I mentioned, with the fisheries industry, with people in fishing, and how we work to do fishery differently, and how we can do this, because some species are disappearing, others will reappear. But we're really in a transition period right now. And what's important to me is to remain in close contact with the sector and continue to work together. Well, I agree with you on a number of issues. Climate change is not something that just happened this year. This has been coming up for many years. Mr. Hardy said 2015, or we've been talking about that at least since then, and even further back. So the department must be the first that had readings on the impact of climate change that we're experiencing today. So predictability is a strategic word, a fundamental term, and must have an important part in the work of all of the public servants in your department. Our nose is right in it now, and we have seen with the witnesses we heard that predictability doesn't seem to have been something important in your department. Now, I'm not blaming you. You haven't been there long, but now that we are in a crisis situation, and I repeat that, it's all nice to say I'm staying in contact with these people, but first of all, we have plants closing. There are workers who don't have jobs. We have confirmation that these workers had been recognized and identified. They were prepared to go back. We have to sit down quickly so that other plants don't close, because closed plants means people on employment insurance, and they don't even qualify sometimes. I think it's a crisis, and that's what the industry is asking for. Crisis cell where you'll be there, the immigration minister will be there, the owners, the fishermen, and see what we can do to act within a week. In a week, it's going to be all over for some of them. I'd like an answer to that, please. Well, look, what I can tell you is that I've had both hands in this for many years. If we look at predictability, you're totally right. But as I said with my colleagues regarding shrimp fisheries, in the past 4 years, I experienced this as an MP. I don't think there are shrimp in your riding, but in mine, there is a shrimp fishery, and people were tearing their shirts 4 years ago to keep the same shrimp quotas. So that's part of my discussions, the discussions I've had with the industry. And if we had listened to the industry this year, they wanted to keep the same shrimp quotas, but it's all the more important for me. And in the discussions I have on the field, the fisherman, the real fisherman, is not necessarily aware of all that information, and yet there is information provided to associations. So there's some work that needs to be done. How can we work all together so that this information can percolate directly down to the fishermen in the sea? I have 10 seconds left. Can I hope that we will establish some kind of crisis unit or cell, or call it what you want, to get out of this impasse about foreign workers? Look, we had all the temporary foreign workers we needed, but there were requests made by the Quebec government, and now we're in a crisis situation because we cannot welcome Mexican workers in our plants, and yet the processing industry for over a year was prepared for the next few years. And we know that the population in the regions is aging. Finding staff with a very high aged population, the average is about 60 in my riding. Some are 70 and 72 in my riding.
Now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the Minister and, of course, to department officials here today. My first question, Minister, first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank you for bringing up the letter that I had sent you relating to the questions that MP Arnold was asking, urging you to provide a detailed response to BCWF's urgent request to treat the problem of invasive species in British Columbia with the seriousness it deserves. I'm looking back at letters that they had sent around it. I see November, I see December, I see February, and then, of course, my letter that followed in March. And I'm not going to dig into it anymore because I have other things I want to ask, but I just want to ask, will you be providing a very clear response and plan forward to treat this problem that BC is now experiencing as a result of a lack of funding and the attention not paid to it that it needed to be?
Je veux vraiment vous remercier.
I really want to thank you, Ms. Barron, for your question and tell you that together with the department, and I will allow Annette to give you information, but I just want to say that I met with the French ambassador last week. There will be a meeting on oceans in Nice in 2025. We'll be able to talk about invasive species.
Thank you, Minister. Just a moment, just because I have other questions I need to get to. If you can just tell me if they'll be getting a response in the near future, that clearly articulates the plan forward. And then I'd like to move on to the next question. I do appreciate the details, but not right now.
Oui, on va vous donner une réponse.
Yes, you will be getting an answer in very short notice.
Thank you. Minister, I wanted to ask, I know that the Prime Minister had provided a mandate to your predecessor, Minister Murray, with a clear mandate to transition away from open net pen fish farms by 2025. And I'm wondering if you could please share, has this mandate changed? Is there any updates on this mandate that I should be aware of?
Oui, je suis au courant. Je suis très au courant.
Yes, I'm fully aware of these aquaculture parks.
Question?
Do you have another question?
If the mandate had changed for you to transition away by 2025 that the Prime Minister had provided.
Okay, j'étais.
I said so publicly. I was in BC in December. I met with people in that sector, and
Seems like the mandate is still the same from the Prime Minister. So I know that the consultation process and the ability to give input has ended around this process. And I'm wondering if you can tell me how many times the department has consulted with the Norwegian-owned companies operating open net finfish farms in Canadian waters. How many times has the consultation process included those from these Norwegian-based companies?
So we would have very detailed records of all of the consultation phases, so we're happy to provide that to you.
Okay, thank you. I get so through an order paper question that was dated and received on November the 2nd, I can let you know that there's been 52 times in which the main operating companies, Maui, Grieg, Cermak, have all been consulted to date. And that the reason why I'm asking is because I'm curious to know how many more times they have been consulted since November 2nd. My next question, thank you, Ms. Gibbons, is that in conversation yesterday with Namgi's chief, Homis Kanis, or his English name is Chief Don Svanvik, he discussed with me a meeting that he recently had with DFO lead of Pacific Aquaculture Transition, Andrea Sear, where he was told, along with other Broughton Alka Palego First Nation chiefs, that the plan forward is a renewal of 2 to 6 year licenses prior to a transition plan even being tabled. Minister, could you please clarify if this is accurate information?
Ce que je peux vous dire, c'est qu'actuellement,
what I can tell you is right now we're in consultation. I have people in my team who will be in BC next week. Nothing has stopped right now. We're talking, but I would say the way I work is to make sure that people put everything on the table and have a discussion. It won't be a definitive transition plan, but we want a transition plan that's temporary with which we can work to come up with a permanent plan in 2025.
So the renewal of licenses for 2 to 6 years, that is being articulated to chiefs in British Columbia. Are you aware of this?
Oui, je suis au courant.
Yes, I'm aware of it because last fall I was told 0 to 10 years. Now, when people are proposing things in meetings we have, we're told 2 to 6 years. So that's part of the discussions, but I am aware of it, yes.
Final question, Minister, is if the chiefs are being told that this transition plan for the open net fish farms to be removed from the water is if they're going to be renewed licenses for 2 to 6 years, yet there isn't a transition plan currently available for those who are impacted by these farms, can you see how a predetermined date of licenses being provided can be contrary to a transition plan? If those dates are already predetermined, how is a transition plan going to work?
Écoutez,
Well, look, as I said, the nets, it's not true that the aquaculture farms will close in 2025. And I have said that in December. Right now, we're working on a transition plan that will be a discussion tool for the coming year so that we can have a permanent transition plan, a final one in 2025. But in the meantime, of course, we will have to have discussions because when it comes to renewal of licenses for raising salmon, for instance, the final date is June 2024. So, of course, as I said, the nets, the facilities will not be closed in 2025. That's not realistic. It can't be done. It's not responsible either. So, as I mentioned, it's a question of food security right now. We have to have talks about that. That's why it's important to me to have consultations with the industry, whether it's about aquaculture, people that are for it, against it, the Aboriginal communities that are for it, those that are against it, and look at this with politicians and with scientists when it comes to the data. Merci.
Mr. Perkins, for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. Liberal Fisheries number 4, who I defeated in the 2021 election, in 2020 did a complete moratorium, as you have done, on the Elver fishery. In 2021, how much did poaching decline as a result? Am I getting extra time? Well, I can't wait for the translation for a minute. Come on.
ben écoutez, j'aimerais, Monsieur Perkins, j'aimerais peut-être avant de répondre à votre question.
Mr. Perkins, before I respond to your question, I'm wondering if you've had time to discuss these issues with the colleagues from Toronto to defend the lobster industry that is so important for the East Coast.
Minister number 5, your predecessor, 18 days into last year's season, closed the fishery. After the 18 days, how much did poaching go down? Simple question. Apparently it didn't go down after the fisheries and minister number 4. How about number 5?
Ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que
What I can tell you is that in the last week and a half, there have been 34 arrests. And personally, I can tell you from the time that I've come into office, I can assure you that Madam Murray did the best possible job to try to prevent this Alver fishery.
Last year, on 120 days of illegal fishing on 300 rivers with thousands and thousands of harvesters, how many charges were laid?
puis je suis très contente.
I'm quite pleased to say that I was in Portland and we went to see, because our colleagues in Portland have been working on this over the last 10 years. They were there to see what the best.
The answer is zero.
I can assure you that.
So now the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. Your previous number 4 did this, it didn't work. Number 5 tried to end it by shutting down legal fishery, it didn't work. And now you're doing the same thing, hoping for a different result. It just sounds crazy. So tell me, you said in your opening that the legal fishery will stay closed until you have your regulations in place. 2 weeks ago, your deputy in this committee said that will take at least 2 years. So if there is no fisheries minister number 7 and you remain in place, is it going to be at least 2 years before this fishery opens?
I'll defer to my officials. The deputy minister can answer, but rest assured that the fishery will be open, as far as I'm concerned, will be open in 2025. There will be regulations, and I certainly hope you will defend the lobster industry, because honestly, it's shameful for the East Coast, for the Gaspé, and for the Maritimes. So please speak to your colleagues, because it creates jobs in our region.
Poachers over legal harvesters and putting 1,000 families out of work while bragging at the Boston Seafood Show that somehow you're defending the fishery when all you're defending is poachers. And the deputy didn't come here to testify. You did. I expect you to answer questions.
You've heard what I did say at the beginning of my opening statement, which is that we're going to make sure that we have a responsible fishery, one that is safe.
Turn it over to you, since I can't seem to get any answers out of the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, just have one question. Obviously, one of the primary roles of the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans is to hear from the stakeholders and the harvesters and those who will be most affected by your decisions. I think the input that we've been hearing at studies and at this committee for a long period of time has been very clear, and they feel like the government has not been hearing or responding to their direct input and advice. And one such example of that is that over the last 8 years under this government, they have hired no less than 400 additional HR employees and roughly only a net of 60 new enforcement officers these past 8 years, according to the Conservation and Protection Agency. That is an absolute indictment on the government and missing the priority. Do you have any answer to that?
What I can tell you is that we hired 101 new officers, enforcement officers.
I don't think that matches the priorities of the harvesters.
Your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Bienvenue, Madame Ministre.
Welcome, Minister.
Seals. And I would like to use the French version, but I'll stay away from it. I've always wanted to use that in parliamentary language. Canada used to have a very successful seal hunt, and certainly that stock is exploding. Do you think that Canada should support a effort to renew a commercial seal harvest? And what could you tell the committee we are doing to begin utilizing that resource? En français.
Yes, I'm quite pleased and proud to speak of this species. I don't think we should consider it a new species, because this really is a species that was fished in the past. We certainly need to address the fact that we're working with these invasive alien species. There have been meetings on the East Coast. A lot of work has been done as well with the indigenous communities, the Inuit, who are in full agreement with the idea of developing this resource in a responsible way. As I said, to be able to use the product to its full capacity, 98% of the product is usable which will lead to economic development in indigenous communities. Some meetings have been held with the ambassadors from Japan, among other countries, and that work is ongoing. This is important for me to be able to say this openly. We really have nothing to hide here. We shouldn't, avoid saying truths, and many countries are open to the idea of working together with us. And the seal in the Gulf, as well as in the Gulf of St. Lawrence to start, you've got a fleet of ships that are in there just lawlessly fishing in our same pantry, as we were saying. The idea is not to abolish or the seal industry, but to make it profitable for all.
Next question. Madam Minister, the one issue on the East Coast, your area, mine, is the frustration that Atlantic fishers have when we close down the spring mackerel fishery and the Americans choose to adjust their quota to accommodate for the mackerel we don't fish. Do you care to opine on how you are going to approach that this year?
What I can say is that, to my mind, it's important to turn to science. My goal really is to make a responsible decision. And as I've stated in the past, I don't intend to be whiter than white. I think that if we can get more information, if we can get some of these exploratory fisheries, I'd be open to some exploratory fisheries. I think we'll look into what's happening in the U.S. and look into how we can do the best work possible. But my main goal, and I want to say it to everyone around the table, is that given the challenges of climate change, what's happening in the Gulf, we need to be able to work together collegially so that we can be the architects of the fisheries of the future. How can we allow the next generation to have access? How do we reassess? And again, I want to commend the committee on its work with respect to the Fisheries Act, reassessing that. I think this is important work. It needs to be done, and it will be done for the benefit of all of our communities, our children, our grandchildren, and I hope my great-grandchildren.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. Finally, somebody went a little bit under time. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, pelagic, herrings, redfish, crabs now, this processing plant. Okay, lobster is still doing okay, but we don't know to what extent the seals aren't getting at the lobsters. That may be a problem. You know, you've presented this budget. That part of it is the result of the taxation on our fishers. But is there a budget really to support the fisheries that are affected by today's realities? In other words, the lack of predictability of this department. DFO, is there a budget for support, for reparations to improve the lot of all of these fishers who are literally dying off? And it's very serious. You sort of were alluding that because I wasn't born in the Gaspé, I didn't know the ocean. You know, my father and my grandfather both fished for decades, and I know the difference between shrimp and crab. Just a question then. Is there something in your budget to support these people? You know, really, honestly, both my phones are ringing off the hook on this one. What I can tell you is that I'm in contact with the sector. I do my tours and I continue. Question inaudible. Answer. I'm continuing to be in touch with people in the sector. I'm in touch with the unions and associations, the industry. There is work that's ongoing and will continue. And as I was saying to people last week, having a permit a license is a privilege. question is not on the mic. So this is a public resource. It belongs to all Canadians. It needs to... Microphone, please. So it has to be harvested well. Could things be done differently? Yes, I think it's important now, given the new Fisheries Act and the work that needs to be done to protect our future in the fisheries. As I said, when is the next Fisheries Act coming? The architect of the fisheries. So certainly we are looking forward to this. Well, we need to have great hopes, says the minister. We are looking forward to this.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm that you can hear me okay. Are the translators able to hear me okay? Okay, I was told that there might have been some problems with my sound there. So, okay, I think I'm going to continue on then with that, if you can hear me. Minister, last time, one of the recent times that the department officials were here, I was asking about the British Columbia government is moving forward with some really strong actions around watershed protection. Now more than ever, we need to have leadership at all levels of government to protect our watersheds with, lower than ever snow and rain. We're seeing droughts. They're just essential as we move forward with climate action. And I see you nodding and agreeing with that. Now, the NDP government in British Columbia is seeking support from the federal government to match the funds for a watershed security fund. Now, I noticed the letter that went out to your colleagues, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Emergency Preparedness. I noticed that you're not included on this, but I will certainly forward it your way as well so that you are aware. I was hoping to get your response on this and the importance of us having leadership at all levels of government working together to protect our watersheds.
Well, look, you're right to mention it. We've seen now with the winter, and I think it's the reality everywhere. There isn't much snow cover, and now we're still concerned about another wildfire season. Potentially, it was catastrophic last year. So really, it's in our interest to work together to protect these zones and drinking water. This groundwater, all of these waters that will end up in our rivers and our oceans. To my mind, this requires cooperation.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. J'aimerais que vous examiniez la lettre que je vous ai transmise. Vos collègues l'ont déjà reçue et ce sont des lettres aussi signées par tous les membres néo-démocrates de la Colombie-Britannique qui demandent au gouvernement fédéral de jumeler les montants accordés par la province pour ce fonds destiné au bassin versant. J'aimerais bien pouvoir aussi communiquer avec vous pour nous entendre là-dessus afin que vous puissiez offrir...
We'll now go to Mr. Small for 4 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Hardy mentioned earlier about basically reports coming out of this committee, and it seems to us that they're collecting dust. Well, we've had the mackerel report that was completed last year, and the pinniped report. And you recently said, Madam Minister, that seal meat would become the new lobster, so I guess you've been hopping on the marketing plan. What government departments because it also recommended a whole of government approach to developing markets. Can you name the government departments that you've worked with so far? Because marketing was identified as the most needed thing to bring back a viable sealing industry. Which government departments? Just name the departments, please.
As I've said, as soon as I took office as a minister, it was a part of my priorities.
Just like the name of the departments that you've engaged so far in helping to develop markets, please.
J'ai des discussions avec
I have discussions with Minister Ng. I had discussions with Minister Ng. Mary Ng.
Thank you. Well, I hope she's helping you out. She needs to. When is the crab management, Madam Minister, when is the crab management plan coming down? The fishery in Newfoundland and Labrador is 10 days away. When can we expect the crab management plan in Newfoundland Labrador waters? May?
bientôt.
Soon.
Soon. Okay. Hopefully it's within 10 days. Well, I've got a little with the budget cuts that's been requested of your department, $15 billion to be shared amongst everybody, I guess, by Minister Freeland in the fall. I want some yes or no answers. Will you commit to not cutting fisheries management science funding?
No.
Yes or no?
I will come back to you to be absolutely sure, because I don't want to
Okay.
mislead the committee.
Thank you.
I don't believe there are impacts.
Will you commit to not cutting DFO enforcement funding?
There is no impact to enforcement funding.
Will you commit to not cutting small craft harbors funding?
Écoutez, je peux vous...
Look, I can tell you, it would be hard to do worse than the cutbacks that the Conservatives brought down.
My questioning, I'm turning it over to my colleague. Mr. Arnold, have at her. Have at her, Mr.
Thank you,
Arnold.
Mr. Spall. Very quickly, Madam Speaker, or Madam Minister, I'd like to inform you that at this point, zebra and quagga mussels are not all over Canada, at least not that we know of, contrary to what you said earlier in the meeting. We need prevention programs in place that your department has been cutting funding to. Why do you continue to ignore the threats of aquatic invasive species, especially zebra and quagga mussels, and the risks that they pose to fish populations, including wild salmon and ecosystems in British Columbia and Western Canada?
Comme je vous l'ai
As I mentioned to you, we have allocated funds in British Columbia, February 14th, as specifically for zebra mussels and the quagga mussel. We're talking about more than $500,000 for that. So that is a step in the right direction. Should we do better, more? Yes. We need to continue to work at this because invasive species, you see it with the green crab, the lamprey, mussels, and there's going to be work that needs to be done. Education, raising awareness among the public.
Thank you, Minister, for appearing before the committee again today. I understand you have to leave after the first hour, and the officials, some of them are staying, and a couple more are going to add to the table. So we'll suspend for a moment now as we switch out for some of the panelists. realise Deputy Minister Annette Gibbons is staying, and Mr. Pelletier is staying from the earlier hour as well. I'd like to welcome Neil O'Day, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister to Strategic Policy, and Doug Wenzel, Regional Director General in the Gulf region. So again, we'll no, I don't believe there's any opening statement. There's just questions from the participants. Okay, we'll go to Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be splitting my time with my colleague, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Perkins got the clock going, so we're going to keep it nice and organised here. So my first question, Mr. Chair, is to Ms. Gibbons. Ms. Gibbons, is the logbook data that I referenced in the last round tabulated, now analysed, for Northern Cod for years 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, because it wasn't as of the end of November or mid-December. So we're 3 months since I received the answer to my order paper question. It told me that 4 years of data hadn't been touched. But the same order paper question also told me that data would be analysed and ready to be incorporated into the stock assessment in April. No small feat. Is it done?
Mr. Chair, we do incorporate logbook data. I will need to return to the committee with the specifics of the use of this data series.
So last year, I asked the Minister's office, Ms. Gibbons, I asked them what they were going off in terms of data when they set last year's quota. When they came out with it at the end of June, I asked, what are you going on? You don't have a trawl survey. They said, we're going off the Sentinel fishery, Sentinel survey. So now I know why. Because for some reason, fishermen's logbook data is not important enough to be analysed. Surely, goodness, you've got enough people and enough budget to get it done. And considering the fact that there was no trawl survey data to be analysed, I mean, this is simply disgraceful and disrespectful to the harvesters to fill out those logbooks, and now you're coming in with a new electronic logbook system when you don't even use the old logbook system. It's unbelievable. So will you commit in your department to tabulating and analysing fishermen's logbook data in a timely enough manner so that it impacts management decisions in the upcoming seasons?
Logbook data can have multiple purposes. It is a compliance tool to make sure that we're able to track what removals are. And it may also be used in stock assessments. It's not necessarily used every time, and that's something that would really come down to the particular approaches of the scientists in any given fishery. So happy to return with more detail on that, Mr. Chair.
All right, I'm going to turn the rest of my time over to Mr. Perkins here now. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Small. A couple of quick questions. First one, CBSA last week told us there's been no order or there's been no ban on export of Elvers leaving Canada, which makes it difficult for us. Have you done any work with GAC or anyone else to make sure there's an actual trade ban on this?
So we are looking at what measures we need as part of the new framework for the Elver fishery. Right now, we have the regulatory framework under the Fisheries Act, which requires possession of a license at the point of harvest.
What's the minimum range in nautical miles that the Canadian Coast Guard requires for the coverage of the new, for NAVTEX?
I'm not sure of the exact answer. I know we're working on updating our network of NAVTEX, but I would have to come back. I don't, that's very technical.
Why has the Coast Guard chosen an old technology that can't reach the range of the new ITU standards?
I know that, we're updating the equipment as we speak. There's a project approved in our part of our investment plan. So I don't know.
But you chose a company that is old technology. It's not the new technology. It has limited range, doesn't go as far as is required. In fact, your tender says that we might change to the new technology in the future. I've met with the companies involved in this. It's impossible to take the existing technology and change it to the new technology. You have to buy new technology. So why would you be spending taxpayer money now to replace a system with old technology that within 2 to 3 years, when the international standards are agreed to, will have to be replaced again? It's a total waste of taxpayer money.
I appreciate your concern, and we're going to look into that. I was not aware of that issue.
We have somebody on the ITU Standards International Council that's negotiating the standards, which have not yet been set, by the way.
We are part of many international association for standard, such as the International Association for Lighthouse.
No, I'm not asking about Lighthouse. In this
Yeah.
case, it's about critical communications, life-saving communications. Is DFO on the International Committee. They have not set the standards, yet you're buying new equipment that doesn't meet the new technology.
Again, I'll have to seek some details and come back to you.
So, you got one more? Okay. So, Ms. Gibbons, just one more time. Why isn't there a ban? How can CBSA do their job if there isn't a ban? They don't have to wait 2 years for regulations. GAC can issue an order on an export permit prohibition now.
Mr. Chair, I can speak to the Fisheries Act and the authorities that we have under the Fisheries Act. I can't speak to other statutes.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. First question to Mr. Peltier, the Coast Guard. It's been a while since the committee was updated on the progress on your, I believe it's called the inshore Coast Guard fleet. We're well into that program. Could you quickly tell us how many new vessels have been delivered under that program and how many have you got left to go?
We're talking about the entire national shipbuilding? Yes.
The small one.
The small
fleet, yeah.
As you know, we got approval for the money just last year, but we did an announcement earlier this year, or last year, sorry, about the construction of the new nearshore fisheries science vessel, which is going to be the first science vessel that is hybrid in Canada, and the contract was awarded to Forion. And so we're progressing on a number of
the first in Canada? The first in Canada?
The first in Canada, yes. I will use hybrid propulsion, which is actually a huge advantage for science because it's very quiet, so it allows for the data collected to be very precise.
Good. What about the smaller vessels that are in a lot of the small communities around both the East Coast, the West Coast and the East Coast?
Yeah,
We've been upgrading those. How many have been delivered? How many have yet to come?
So the project was for 20 units. I think we took delivery, or we're taking delivery of the 16th one. So it's going extremely well. And those have proven to be very efficient, and both the users and who is in the receive of the service are very appreciative of the boat.
Okay, thank you, because obviously the Coast Guard provides a very valuable service to not only the East Coast fishery, but to the population in general, and the timely rebuilding of the fleet. Ms. Gibbons, or who you may want to direct the question to, I would have a series of questions, and you may have to get back to the committee on these, because earlier when the minister was here, we had a series of questions, small craft harbors. I would like for you to provide to the committee the total budgetary expenditure in small craft harbors beginning fiscal 2016 up until fiscal 2023. And how that compares with the previous 8 years prior to fiscal 2016. And if you could do that as well, Madam Ms. Gibbons, in the area, in the department's capacity to provide adequate protection, so in the whole area of the department, as it provides for protection personnel in the department. I want to see a comparison because there was a lot of questions raised about the capacity and they did not see a negative impact from any cost reductions. So I want to look at the same period for protection personnel, part of the department, and as it compared to the previous time frame.
Conservation and protection?
Yes, conservation and protection, what the budget was, what the number of personnel was. And then I want to take a look as well, if you could get back to the committee, on from the science, the very key science area of the department, what the personnel was, what the budget allocation was in that period compared to the previous 8-year period. Is that something you could provide the committee with? Okay, thank you. My next question, Madam Deputy Minister, from where you sit and having to oversee a complex department with many regulatory challenges and challenges in enforcement of law and species, as the committee is going to review the Fishery Act coming up, what area would you advise the committee, what areas of the Fishery Act could be improved that would assist the department in its ability to better enforce conservation and protection in various species?
I won't speak.
And let me ask you, why I go back, what I want you to focus on, because there's been numerous witnesses appeared before the committee that points out that the penalty is insignificant as it relates to the crime, and whether it's Elvers and the host. We've had fisheries that become extremely valuable, the lobster fishery example. So sometimes getting caught is the cost of doing business. And so it's not really a deterrent. And since it's very difficult to have fishery protection personnel in every backyard, I firmly believe that the penalties and the implications for the person doing the wrongdoing must be much higher. So if you could just, in my time left, give me your opinion, since you're the chief administrative person within the department, your opinion on that.
I think, Mr. Chair, that the work that we're doing on Elvers, we've clearly identified an area where we need a more fulsome regulatory approach than we currently have, and so that is something, it's not at the level of the Act, of course. I would say, in general, the Minister has a very strong focus on being able to be adaptive in the context of climate change and the impact on fisheries. She thinks a lot about the renewal of fisheries and younger generations, new generations coming into the fishery and the opportunities for them. You heard her speak about owner-operator and making sure that we've got the right kinds of controls that we need there. So I think those are some of the priorities that I would say are top of mind for the Minister and the Department.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now go to Madam Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put a question to Mr. Pelletier, and then I'll come back to the temporary foreign workers. We got more complaints of harassment and bullying in Quebec, and I'm wondering whether this is because they didn't understand. Nothing's happening. And there was an appointment, a unilingual Anglophone, Maureen Kelly, as superintendent, a position which deals a lot with Francophones. Do you think it's normal to have someone who only speaks English to serve Francophones in your shop? Well, the person you're mentioning works in Sarnia. She covers Quebec too, but she has an assistant superintendent in Quebec who looks after people deployed in Quebec, and another in Sarnia for Ontario. And he's bilingual, so he can explain in English what's going on in Quebec in French. She has begun taking French courses. She speaks French a little bit, even though she hasn't passed the level yet, but she's made a commitment to reaching that level. We see the same thing with St. Lawrence River pilots. They can be trained privately with any regard to language of work on the St. Lawrence River. And these pilots are very worried about that. So I'm wondering whether you had a different reading of this. That I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The St. Lawrence is very difficult to navigate, especially at l'Île aux Coudres near Quebec. So since the pilots are ringing the alarm for me, what is your reading of the situation where private companies can train their pilots and St. Lawrence pilots no longer have any oversight over the training of these people, and they'll end up with oil in the St. Lawrence? Well, we're not involved in that, but I can tell you that all our communications officers are bilingual and can control the navigation and the traffic, the passage of vessels, and so on. With regard to the reform of the Piloting Act, I really can't comment. It would be up to Transport Canada. Well, we'll see about that. Ms. Gibbons, I pointed out to the minister that I was concerned, and I support the voices of Quebec fishermen. The fishery is becoming extinct in Quebec. I know you haven't been there very long, and I know that predictability means 10 or 15 years in advance. How will you remedy this? Because this has to be remedied. I hope you have the will to do that. How are you planning to remedy the situation? Because I had a question on small craft harbors, but we won't need them much anymore because there'll be no more boats. Do you have any idea of the budget that could be allocated, be it to buy back licenses, crisis units, to make workers come in? Is the minister talking to the immigration minister? Because the immigration minister is saying it's because of Mexico. She says it's because of Quebec. I think there's somebody somewhere who must be looking after this.
Mr. Chair, there are several things that I would say in relation to what the député has raised. Premièrement, excuse-moi, je devrais aller en français.
Sorry, I said answer in French. First, as to the issue of predictability, we have scientific data sets, we have surveys we carry out. Just like in the area, in the shrimp fishery, we see that there's been a drop in the levels, and we have committee meetings with the sector to discuss where things are heading. So for specific fisheries, we have discussions on these changes so that fishers can predict what will be happening in the future. We also do more global surveys, studies. So we've done one on the East Coast oceans. Every year we produce different reports on the coasts, and then we discuss the trends in water temperature of the oceans, and that's another thing that we do for the sector. Sorry, I have 1 minute left. My question is this. In your budget, because we are talking budget, in your budget, will you be able to free up some money to financially support through the buyback of these licenses or through other measures those fishers that are currently being affected? All of these families are heading towards a wall. You know, we're talking about children and other. I'm not trying to be a populist like others here, but there are families who are going to be, a large number of families, the whole Gaspé Peninsula, the economy of the entire Gaspé Peninsula is going to be affected. In your budget, is there any kind of short-term remedy to address this situation before all the studies and consultations are done? Because this takes a long time. In the meantime, you can basically dry up all the ships and have no fishery at all. The minister said earlier that she had discussions with the sector, with the industry. And another thing that I could add, as to the fisheries funds, the adaptation funds exist for the fishers and for the processors. This is something the minister specified specifically which would be available for this transition in the shrimp sector. For those who want to turn to redfish, for instance, fishery, that's one example.
And we'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Ms. Gibbons. Ms. Gibbons, we, as you know, conducted a study recently with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission and wanted to do a follow-up on that. As you know, the committee recently conducted the study looking at the allocation of the Great Lake Fishery Commission of resources to the Great Lake Fishery Commission. And as you know, the commission has been paralyzed, for a lack of better words, around uncertainty of funding. Now, I know that the funding has been allocated, but my question is around one of the recommendations that was that came forward as a result of this study was to that the portfolio management responsibilities and machinery of government functions for the Great Lakes Fishery Commission be transferred from DFO to Global Affairs Canada. So to look at it being moved. And as far as I know, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission has not received a clear response on this. I don't believe we've received a clear response as a committee as to the status of this transfer. Can you please provide an update?
Mr. Chair, I'll respond in two parts. First thing is just on the budget funding. We do have a memorandum of understanding with the GLFC now since November, I believe, and we've had a lot of very constructive discussions in recent months to make sure that we have a strong working relationship with the Commission and the commissioners. And I think much progress has been made there. On your particular question around a transfer of the mandate from DFO to Global Affairs, that really is a machinery of government issue and not within the purview of DFO.
So, sorry, Ms. Gibbons, just to follow on that, because we did look at it extensively. So what would you recommend to the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission and also to the committee members who had this as recommendation number 8 that came forward? What would you recommend then would be the next steps to see this happen?
As I say, I mean, this is something that is well understood within DFO, Global Affairs. We've engaged with Global Affairs on it. At the end of the day, machinery of government decisions are the prerogative of the Prime Minister. And so I don't really have any specific recommendation for you. It's just, it really is not part of my remit to do anything to move that forward.
So the question would be better posed to the Minister? Is that...
You would have the same response from the Minister. Yeah, it really is outside of DFO's.
Okay, well, somebody has to be able to make it happen. Perhaps the Minister can apply the pressure necessary to the Prime Minister to see this move in the right direction. Ms. Gibbons, if you can provide some clarity in my questions to the Minister, and we all wish as MPs that we had more time with the Minister to be able to fully understand. One thing I was confused by was the consultation process happening with the open net pen fish farms out of the water and what that looks like as far as the consultation process. Now, my understanding of dates, I think, are different than the Minister's. So perhaps you can provide some clarity. My understanding was that March 8th was the deadline for consultation, around 2 to 6 year license extensions. March 15th was the end of consultation for phase 4 of the transition planning process in total, and that the current license will expire for all. Can you clarify, please? Provide some clarification on these dates and where we're at with the consultation process. I didn't get that clarity.
So, Mr. Chair, there are really two separate consultation processes, and obviously they're very linked because they're dealing with salmon farms. But the transition plan is about sort of the future direction for the industry at large, for the sector, what we do, and the government's commitment was around transitioning away from open net pen farms. The license renewals are the specific permits that allow particular activities to happen at particular sites. And from a legal, regulatory perspective, we need to treat those as distinct activities and to consult on them. And so that is why we have two different consultation exercises going on. And you have the two different dates that, so phase 4 consultations refers to the transition plan consultations. The license renewal consultations are distinct, and we obviously we're talking to the same people, but about the license renewals separately from the transition plan.
So, because what I'm hearing are concerns from Indigenous chiefs, from members of the community, that there is discussion that it's going to be an extension of licenses on the higher end of that spectrum of 2 to 6 years, and that this it presupposes, I guess, what that transition plan will look like. If there's a, can you see, using logic here, if we put a license into place for 6 years, that again, that's going to then provide the framework of what that transition plan is going to look like, whereas it should be the other way around. And so that's a concern that's being brought to my attention. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, and we've heard a variety of views on this issue. As the minister noted, there are different perspectives on license renewals, just as there are different perspectives on the transition, the future of the sector and how it is regulated. And so, as she noted, she heard from 1 year to 10 years, so quite the spectrum. And so the range settled on for consultation purposes for the license renewals was 2 to 6. There is no decision at this point on what the license renewal period would be. That is the purpose of the consultation. But we gave a band so people would have something specific to react to.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I regret our time is so short here, but since we are discussing estimates, I have a motion to move regarding estimates, and that it is that the committee invite the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard to appear for no fewer than 2 hours regarding the 2024-2025 main estimates, and that this meeting take place as soon as possible, but no later than April 12th, 2024. And that motion is being sent to the clerk right now for distribution, but I can repeat it again slowly if others need to hear it. Again? Okay, again, the motion is that the committee invite the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard to appear for no fewer than 2 hours regarding the 2024-25 main estimates, and that this meeting take place as soon as possible, but no later than April 12th, 2024. Simply another invitation for the minister to appear on the main estimates before the budget is released.
Mr. Callaway.
I'm just wondering if we could have just a few moments, maybe 2 minutes, just for us to chat over here.
Okay.
If possible,
We
just to suspend for
a couple of
3
minutes.
minutes.
Yeah. Suspend for a couple of minutes to allow some conversations to take place. there's any comments, or Mr. Morrissey.
Well, Chair, a couple of things. I thought, was it the last meeting we agreed on a subcommittee to hash out an agenda going forward that we'd stick to? So now we have something coming. The minister was just here. You know, it is. That's my only point. Is as we said, we have a Lenti, and that was the whole debate that we had in here. Was it on Tuesday's meeting, or what meeting we had about establishing the subcommittee? Because, and it was the opposition, our agenda was pretty jammed with a host of studies and reports that haven't been dealt with. This is another 2-hour meeting, and actually, if it went, it would occur before, I believe, the budget even comes down, I think, on that. So when you look at it, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with all due respect to Mr. Morrissey, this committee is basically the only outlet in Ottawa that gives any voice at all to fisheries, to the fishing industry. And the stakeholders would love nothing more than to hear from the minister. And I must say, she doesn't need anyone to carry her water for her. She's quite capable of throwing her own smacks. So I think there's no better use of committee time than to have the minister here defending her decisions and maybe enlightening us on why she made some of her decisions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, and I hear Mr. Morrissey. If we can pass this motion, then it can be forwarded to the subcommittee as part of that discussion of what we're going to study as committee. So I think, you know, having it in there in the mix, we can determine further if it's valid to have her. It is traditional that we invite the minister on the main subs, so I don't think there's anything out of the ordinary here. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Ms. Barron, yes.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure, just because we had gone back to the mover of the motion, I thought maybe I wasn't visible.
Peut-être que je n'étais pas visible, mais je le suis apparemment. Merci beaucoup. Je voulais prendre la parole en faveur de cette motion. J'étais l'auteur de la motion.
If you'll hang on a second, Ms. Barron, I'm getting translation from the English to French in my ear, and I can't understand a word that you're saying.
There's a little button you got to press there, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, I got that in English. Yeah. Okay.
It's the interpreter's fault. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. Ms. Barron, if you could start again, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I feel like it's always a good opportunity to acknowledge the incredible work of the interpreters. Thank you for everything you're doing. So I just wanted to speak in favor of this motion. Any opportunity to get the minister here to be able to ask her the very important questions that we have is a good opportunity. As the mover of the motion for the subcommittee, I want to reiterate that, because absolutely we need to form that subcommittee to ensure we're all on the same page around our priorities as a committee, but I will always make room for the minister to come. That is a priority. So just to make my voice heard on that. Thank you, Chair.
People to speak. Mr. Perkins.
Just a quick comment, which is unusual for me. I thought I'd tape it for you. Just to remind everyone, estimates takes precedence over everything. Government legislation, private legislation, anything else we're doing, estimates is the priority. So when a motion is moved to have the minister come on estimates, then I think that's for the committee to put that in. It's over government legislation. Estimates are, so just to make sure that that's the priority and everyone knows that, because I'm not sure, certainly when I got here, I wasn't aware of that.
I think the motion is a little aspirational in terms of the timing requested, particularly because the budget isn't going to come down until the 16th, and the minister, you know, may or may not be able to attend. I mean, we can pass it, but in the knowledge that the timing that we're requesting may be subject to change.
Well, I think I may be the last person speaking to this by the looks of it, but look, the minister, it was mentioned the minister doesn't need anyone to hold her water, and you bet your bottom dollar she doesn't. And she, she'll come to speak to the main estimates. I think that, to Mr. Hardy, MP Hardy's point, whether it's on the 12th or somewhere around that time frame, but I think we all believe it's important for the minister to come to speak to that. She came here today for an hour, and the main estimates is a key point of government, key point of the ministry and the department in terms of funding what we do and do well. So I'd like to go back, if I can, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Hardy, or Mr. Arnold, rather, to kind of, you touched upon the motion and passing the motion with, and I don't want to put words in your mouth to the chair, some flexibility. Would that be fair to say? If it's not the 12th, let's say it's sometime within April. Is that doable? Just I want to make sure that we are concrete on what our asks are so we can plan accordingly. As MP Barron said, we're going to form a subcommittee to give, I think, a greater direction to where we go. So maybe if we can go through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Arnold in terms of what I think I heard, and I want to make sure that's accurate.
If I can, the motion is to invite the minister. We're not summoning her. We're not demanding. We're inviting her to appear, and inviting her to appear no later than April 12th.
Mr. Bragdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we can move to a vote quite quickly on this if it's needed or required. So I just, yeah, anyways. I know, I get that.
Yeah,
right
yeah.
after. I mean, he leads by example in that category.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go to the vote.
Okay, we'll go to the vote. Get over with. Come on.
Monsieur Cormier.
Oui.
Mr. Maloney.
Yes.
Just say yes.
Mr. Hardy.
Yes.
Mr. Killaway.
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey.
Yes.
Mr. Arnold.
Yes.
Mr. Bragdon.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins.
You bet.
Mr. Small.
Yes.
Madame Desbiens.
Oui.
Miss Barron.
Yes.
Carried.
Okay. Carried unanimously. Okay, so we'll get that letter off to the minister and see what kind of a response we get. Now, Mr. Allen, your time has expired. We'll now go to. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hold on, hold on, can we check to see if that's 30-minute bells or? Okay, so let's finish out at 5:30. Sure. Okay, if everyone is in agreement. All right, so Mr. Kellaway, you're up for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to direct my questions to Ms. Gibbons or Mr. Wenzel, just to go back to Elver for a second. And I want to go back specifically to the research and the discussions that have happened with our Maine representatives on how they, I wouldn't say perfected, but changed how they regulated the Elver fishery and how they enforced the Elver fishery. So I guess my question is, what are like the top 3 to 4 best practices that we have learned from our discussions with the Maine counterparts, and how they might fit into the new regulatory framework that we're proposing with the hopes for next year's fishery?
Maybe I can start and then ask Doug to complement. I think that as a general principle, the fact that Maine's regime requires possession, a license to possess Elvers all along the supply chain is really, it's that sort of stem to stern kind of approach that makes sure that there's an ability to control in a very, very granular way. Maine has some particular features which are really detailed. That when we visited with them, I visited with the minister and Doug a couple of weeks ago. The fact that every transaction has to be recorded as a debit or credit as it passes, as Elvers pass from one person in the supply chain to another. They require that to happen, so there is that record, but there is also a record of the payment, and the payment has to be by check. So that is an additional requirement that they have to really ensure that that there's evidence. There's no cash allowed in Elver sales in Maine. Another thing that they did to try to, again, tighten the controls was to require that sales have to be at an establishment, a place of business that is registered. You cannot sell Elver out of the back of a truck or on a wharf. Or it's not a wharf, it's rivers, but nonetheless, you can't do it on the riverbank. So again, that is a very, very tight requirement. They also, when the Elvers are leaving the state of Maine, there is an Elver event that takes place, an export event, sorry, not an Elver event. And that is a regulated, overseen activity. So you have to apply for a permit to export Elvers, and there will be an event for the export that is very tightly controlled. So a number of things along the supply chain that, and they have, of course, evolved with time.
Thank you for that. I want to look to today. And with the season closed, for those watching back home or across Canada or across the street, for that matter, I want to get a sense of the enforcement actual numbers. Number one, if we can highlight what's happened in the last 2 weeks. I also don't know if this is appropriate or not, so you can tell me if it is or isn't. But many of the comments we've had around this table with different stakeholders, government-wise, for example, CBSA, it really highlighted that we need to tighten our game in terms of the supply chain. Obviously, that's why we're looking for new regulations. But I want to get a sense of, are we doing any work with, focusing on the transport of the Elver to, for example, airports and ports themselves? Is there any activity happening that you can either share in part or in whole, or give us some indication of what's happening now? Because that is being transported. And I know that's not simply a DFO prerogative, but I'm wondering if you could provide any details on that.
So I'll ask Doug to give the numbers for this year, but I will say one thing that we have seized more vehicles this year than we did all of last year, and the season is just at its start. So that's one thing I would note. And we absolutely are doing surveillance at the point of export and along the supply chain. That is part of we have the rivers as it is in the sales process from one a buyer to another, and then at the point of export. But Doug can provide more.
Yeah, thanks very much. So, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. So just broadly speaking, we've dedicated more resources again this year to the Elver fishery, including bringing in a number of fishery officers from other regions across Canada. Over the last 2 weeks, we have arrested a total of 34 individuals, and as well as a number of different assets, countless pieces of fishing gear, as the Deputy Minister has alluded to. And we do work not just riverside. I mean, obviously, we want to make sure that our frontline efforts are the priority, but we do work at major ports of exit and at airports, including an operation last night at one of the key airports. So that work is going to continue to augment work that's on the ground, riverside.
That's very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make one last attempt and express all the hopes that fishermen When I say fishermen, these are captain owners, these are bridge workers, they're people in processing plants, owners of plants. All the hopes that these people have on a way of speaking, of working between DFO and immigration to exert pressure so that foreign workers arrive on time in the current context where the shrimp fishery is in crisis, a drastic decline that compromises the very existence of certain economies in the Quebec sector for fisheries. So given that context, could there be some kind of emergency cell? Could that be a solution to solve the temporary workers problem? That's the most urgent thing as we speak. And that emergency or crisis cell can then think just as quickly about implementing support so that, of course, these people have a bit of a cushion, some of them, but others are really stuck. The boats won't sell and they'll go bankrupt. A lot of people will go bankrupt. In order to ensure the knowledge when the fishery resumes, when we find solutions for these fishermen, can we ensure a succession? All that is fundamental. So given that context, could an emergency cell be put in place to deal with the extreme problems in Quebec and in the Maritimes too? When it comes to temporary foreign workers, we're in constant contact with the Department of Immigration, with the plants in all the provinces. There are companies that serve these plants and that put together response to all these requests. We're in contact with all those people to make sure that this is. Are you able to tell us this will happen?
I'll go to Ms. Barron to finish off. 2.5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. I just lost you there. Kind of love virtual parliament. It just adds an element of surprise to everything, doesn't it? Thank you again, Ms. Gibbons, for being here. My question, Ms. Gibbons, is around the First Nations Fisheries Council. So as you may be aware, I'm sure you're aware, the First Nations, just let me get my points here. So the First Nations caucus is a key participant in the Pacific Salmon Treaty process. And as you know, the First Nation caucus is vital to Canadians and Indigenous people participating in this process. And so they are a key part of this process. And unfortunately, something that I brought to the minister's attention in 2023 was that the First Nations Fisheries Council was reaching out with concerns that despite the immense role that they take on in this process, that the funding that they receive is minimal. That they don't have the funding to truly participate, to make sure that they are speaking with members of First Nations to bring forward the information, to have the meetings required for them to ensure they're all on the same page, to participate fully in the process. And so I did write a letter to the minister a year ago asking for this funding to be enhanced. The First Nation Fisheries Council is still reaching out with concerns around the funding being allocated. I'm wondering if you could speak to this and please share the steps forward to ensure that this participation can be done in a fulsome manner.
Happy to take that away and look at it. I would say as a general principle, under our broad Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative, which is close to $700 million over 5 years, there's a lot of different initiatives that engage First Nations BC First Nations in salmon restoration, in discussions around the status of stocks and things like the Treaty Commission. So There are various initiatives that would provide funding for engagement of First Nations, and so I think that that's something that's important to consider in this context. But we can come back with more specifics in response to the correspondence that you raised.
Thank you for that, Ms. Barron. Your time is up. The 2.5 minutes don't be long going.
If in the last 2 minutes that are left here, I think we have just 2 minutes before we have to
Well,
go.
I've got something to say, so I'm going to speak first. If we got any time left after that, I want to say thank you to the officials for again being here today and sharing their knowledge with the committee and answering various questions. I want to say thank you to the clerk, the analysts, the interpreters, and of course our electronics people that make this all a success each and every day that we have a meeting. So again, I want to say a big thank you to everyone. We got about 30 seconds left, Mr. Arnold. I don't know if you...
Really quickly, Mr. Chair, I move that, I want to move the motion that was put on notice on March 15th, that given that the carbon tax is hurting fishermen...
Mr. Chair, a point of order, Mr. Chair. The meeting is over.
The government has committed to hiking the carbon tax.
I second it, Mr. Chair.
The committee report to the House is...
Adjourn. Yeah.